good time of day that you're listening.
Right. That's true.
Welcome to Relatively Weird, the podcast where a couple of cousins get together and talk about everything weird. I'm Kim.
I'm Jilly.
And we're back again.
We are back. Have you heard of the Cleveland torso murders?
I have.
You have?
Yes. I don't know a lot of details, but I
Okay.
have heard of the...
I hadn't.
I mean,
yeah. Yeah, you're kind of history-oriented.
yeah. I prefer an old-timey...
Murder?
The thought of talking about somebody whose family is still alive is uncomfortable.
Yeah. This was
To
in the
me.
1930s.
Yeah. So you're probably good.
Cleveland, Ohio, 1934.
If you hadn't guessed.
Yeah. In an area also known as Kingsbury Run was a natural watershed. What does watershed mean?
A watershed is a land area that collects and drains water to a common body of water, such as a river, lake, or bay.
Okay. Well, today it's the location of Warrensville Heights and Maple Heights. So if you're in Ohio, maybe you know where that is.
Okay, so it's almost like, it looks like a valley, kind of.
Okay. Well, during the Depression, this area was a shanty town, populated by vagrants and oftentimes immigrants looking for work. September 5th, 1934. A man looking for driftwood along the shore spotted what he thought was a tree trunk on the beach of Lake Erie. Upon closer inspection, he saw that this was the bottom half of an adult female body.
The bottom half.
The bottom half.
It's not the torso.
Well, the bottom half of the torso. Yes. No, I'll explain.
Okay.
So the woman had appeared to be in her 30s. Her torso had the thighs still attached, but it was severed at both of her knees. So it was basically like, I don't know, probably like the belly button down.
Oh my God.
Yeah. The skin had a reddish appearance as if it had undergone a preserving type treatment. Do you remember when we went on the Boston, it's like the Boston Haunted tour or
Yes.
whatever, and how we had walked by that display that was like a book, but it was like human skin?
Oh, yeah.
I wonder if that's like the same, like that's what they do with, if you ever want to preserve human skin. It just made me think of that. That's the only time I've ever seen like
Preserved human skin.
Yeah.
But see, wasn't that like less red? Isn't that more like a brown, almost like a leathery,
I don't know. It's
like tanning of a hide?
Yeah, but isn't that what, I mean, I don't know. They said reddish. I don't know how reddish, but.
Describe it better to me, sir.
She would be known as a Lady of the Lake. Later, she would be referred to as Victim Zero, as the police had not yet discovered that this murder would be one in a series of murders. They thought that it was just a one-off.
They were like, Lady of the Lake's too fancy. Let's make it easier to remember.
But imagine, like,
I'd be pissed.
what would you do?
What would I do if I found the bottom half of a torso on the beach?
Was severed at the knee. What would you do? Would it trigger your anxiety? Like a panic attack?
No.
No?
No. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't. No. I think I'd just...
I can't be around, like, things that have nothing to do with me, but that are, like, serious. Like, you know when people, like, film, like, Karen interactions and stuff, but they don't have... Not even Karen, but something, like, worse, like somebody's yelling at an employee or something. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be able to sit there and, like, I don't know, be a part of that.
Okay, but so that's, like, conflict. This is just...
This is worse, though. Because now you have to be involved. Now you're going to call the cops.
Well, what are you
like-
what are you going to do? You going to go away and be like,
No,
someone
I'm
else will find
No, I'm
it?
saying you're, as a human, it's like if you witness a car wreck, what are you going to do? Drive away? Like, you got to help the anyway.
So, my go-to response is, I would call the police.
Okay.
In terms of my emotional response, I have no idea.
Okay.
I don't know.
I can't handle anything terrible.
I do think that my brain would just be like, we're gonna deal with this later. Let's just get through
Yeah.
the immediate, and then we'll emotionally unpack this later.
So the idea of a serial killer was not common back then. It was mostly assumed that people were murdered by people who knew them and were motivated by things like jealousy or greed. So a whole year later, September 2nd, 1935, two boys in Kingsbury Run were playing catch at the base of Jackass Hill. I giggled when I had to type that up. Their ball had rolled down a hill into some bushes. When the two boys went to retrieve the ball, the bodies of two white men had been discarded in those same bushes. Their heads were found buried nearby, and both men had been castrated.
Oh my.
One man had been dead for a week. His skin was preserved, as the Lady of the Lakes had been, in a reddish chemical. He had been in his 40s at the time of his death. The other man had been dead for 2 or 3 days. He was naked except for a pair of socks and was drained of all his blood, with rope burns on his wrists. His cause of death had been decapitation. The other one of the men could be successfully identified, so the first guy. This was Edward Andersey, a 28-year-old drug dealer, bootlegger, and known nuisance to the police, basically. 1936, 2 baskets wrapped in newspaper were discovered along Hart Manufactory building on Central Ave. Inside the baskets were a woman's torso, 2 thighs, an arm, and a hand. The rest of her body parts were uncovered in the snow in a nearby vacant lot, but no head was found. Her cause of death was again decapitation, and the killer had waited for rigor mortis to set in before disarticulating the rest of her body. I don't... Why, though? Wouldn't it be harder? Maybe that's the point. Like, it's... You can make, like, an easier cut than something that, like, has more give to it.
I don't like the thought of any of it. But I underestimated my brain when you said basket. Thought, like, Easter basket with a handle.
Yeah.
Nope.
That's what I picture in my head, but I don't, This was thought to be the possible body of Florence Polillo, a waitress/barmaid and a bootlegger. June 5th, that same year, 2 boys discovered a pair of pants under a tree. Inside was a man's head. The rest of the body was dumped in front of the Nickel Plate Railroad Police Station. It had been drained of blood. His cause of death would be decapitation. So now whoever's doing this is like, they don't care where they're putting it.
No.
Which, by the way, like, I don't know how big this area is, but even if it was just like the town in which you live, like, it's the 1930s. People are outside of their houses doing things.
Yes.
Or whatever, the shacks that they live in at that point. But, like, imagine you must have heard these by now. Like, people are being murdered and you're just like, I might come across body parts on my way to work.
I mean, it's been kids a few times. Mm-hmm. That's horrible.
Yeah. The police photographed the head for the newspaper and and had the head displayed in hopes that someone could identify him.
I guess.
This man would later be known as the Tattooed Man, and despite his very distinct tattoos, including a butterfly and the names Paul and Helen on him, he was never identified. The tattoos at the time were associated with sailors, foreigners, and criminals. So all these people are like, I mean, think about who lives there, though.
Right.
It's people who are poor. It's people who, I mean, now we would call it what, like a side gig or like a, I don't know. What do you call it? Like a side hustle or something where you're, bootlegging.
Oh, well, yes. I guess, yeah. Because you said it's mostly, I guess, people coming through and...
Yeah, vagrants or foreigners or people who thought they could find work here.
I mean, I would think that somebody with those tattoos couldn't have been in the area long for nobody to, or his associates don't want to admit that they know him.
Later, multiple death masks were made and created for certain victims to help the public identify them. And I think they made one of Edward Andersey, but they're like, they already identified. They knew who he was. So the documentary that I had watched, The Historian, was not quite sure why they did that. But maybe, I don't know, maybe it was like, if I knew this person, maybe it triggers a memory that like, oh, when I was hanging out with him, I also saw this man or woman, whoever. 1 month later, in July, the headless body of a 40-year-old man was found in the woods by, I think, a teenage girl.
For God's sakes. Just ruining the lives of the
Why
adolescents.
are you in the woods by yourself, though? He had been dead for 2 months before being found. His clothing was in a pile nearby, and the ground was covered with blood. So it was determined that this must have been the site of his murder. So, other than being in the same location, none of these people could be identified. Not none of them, but a lot of them weren't identified, and they probably because they were either not from there or whatever, but it's like, you're not safe. It doesn't matter who you are.
No.
I mean, I'm reading off these things, but just imagine you going about your business. That's all I can... It's lather, rinse, repeat at this point.
Right.
A man attempting to hop a train on East 37th Street tripped over a man's torso. The lower half of the torso, including the legs, were fished out of the water nearby. So, I don't know exactly, like, was it just a like, was he wrapped in something? Or, like, how do you trip over, not see it?
Where are you? Like, what?
Know. This one was weird.
The other thing is, I'm thinking, like, that area, obviously in the 1930s, it obviously looked different than you're imagining in your head right now. But I'm like, were there so few people in this area that he was able to dump a torso just out?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what this person had. Maybe people had brought a lot of their belongings with them when they were walking around. So it's like, if you have like a big sack of something and you're a vagrant, like probably, you have your whole life with you and you're just going from like shack to shack or I don't know. His head was removed with one stroke.
What the hell?
The victims were finally thought to be connected to one murderer. Oh my gosh.
Oh my, finally.
It was noticed that the female victims were often more severely dismembered than the male victims. Cleveland's mayor then decided to hire Eliot Ness. So I'm sure people are familiar with Eliot Ness, or at least know the name. He was best known for his work as the Prohibition Bureau in the 1920s. He became the head of Chicago's department in the FBI, in the FBI. He was assigned to take down Al Capone. He and 10 other men would be known as the Untouchables, as they could be relied on not to take bribes.
Yes.
So he was a pretty big deal. In Kingsbury Run, Eliot Ness and detectives Peter Merylow and Martin Zalewski. They interviewed more than 1,500 people.
1,500? Mm-hmm. Holy crap.
The department as a whole interviewed around 5,000 people, making this the biggest investigation in Cleveland's history. But think about, like, I mean, I started in the 1934, and this, I think, went to 1939, so...
True.
Span of 5 years. September 15th, more than 30 detectives had gathered at the Cleveland Police Center to discuss theories and leads. So this was like, I think they do this now. It was just if there's a serial killer, this is common practice, but this is like the first of its kind where they were getting together like a bunch of people to be like, what do we think?
Right. Let's share information. And
yeah. They decided that it must be a man, as the killer needed to be strong enough to carry the bodies or body parts from place to place. And the killer must either be like a doctor or a butcher to have been able to cut so cleanly when dismembering the bodies. So yeah, I mean, I think at least you would think it was a man. Like how, you gotta have so much muscle to be, even to dismember something, like, let alone kill someone in that way, like decapitating people. But
yeah.
February 1937, the upper half of a female torso in her mid-20s was found on the shores of Lake Erie near Bratton Hall. The other half of the torso washed up 3 months later. Ugh. Curiously, her death was not decapitation. I don't know how they determined that. Like, I don't know if it's that there's certain injuries to other parts that, you know what I mean? Like,
so I think now they can tell by how much, you can tell how much a wound has bled. So if they determined that the head
Yeah.
was the first thing that came off. So I actually was thinking that as you were saying that, at that time frame, I would imagine they would be able to say the head was the first thing that was removed. Whether, I guess if there were no other stab wounds,
Right.
you could determine that
Yeah,
that was
that's true too.
And then the rest of the cuts probably didn't bleed as much because the person was already dead.
Yeah, didn't we talk about that with... It's weird that I'm doing another torso murder, but the one in London where it was... They were talking about how he was dismembered after he had died, but it was because, like, the clothing that he had on didn't have any blood, or it was very minimal.
Right, yes.
It is interesting. I mean, it's so morbid, but it is interesting to think about, like, the science behind a lot of it, and how much better it's gotten since the 1930s. But even then, like, holy crap. June 1937, a teen boy, just always teenagers or little kids, found a skull under the Lorraine Carnegie Bridge. Burlap sack of bones of an African-American woman was found nearby. It was estimated that she had been dead for up to a year before being found. Dental records would unofficially link the bones to a Rose Wallace of Skull Ave. So I think in total, they only identified like 3 people out of all the victims.
Jeez.
July 1937, a National Guardsman spotted the headless body of a man in the Cuyahoga River. I'm just laughing because when I had typed this out, I totally spelled it wrong because I was listening to, I think it was either a documentary or something, and I was like, I'll look it up later.
Typed it phonetically.
And it was completely wrong. His abdomen had been gutted and his heart was torn out. So April the following year, a man on his way to work found what he at first thought was a dead fish.
Yep.
Turned out to be the lower half of a woman's leg.
The hell kind of fish?
I don't know.
They're massive.
Think about like it's probably got the same kind of, it's like tapered on, I don't know.
But that's huge.
Yeah, that's true.
That's a big fish.
Some fish are big.
Just friggin' washed up. Oh my god.
A month later, police pulled 2 burlap sacks from the water with her torso and the rest of her legs. Which I wonder... So, hold on. So it says, my notes say, she had drugs in her system at the time of her death. The police were unsure if she had been drugged by the killer or if she had taken drugs herself. So that was like their first indication of like, maybe that's how he's getting some people. Maybe, I don't know, you meet at a bar or something, you drug their drink and follow them outside. They pulled out her torso, what did I say, 2 months? Oh, a month later. How do you know it's the same person, you know? They didn't have DNA testing back then.
No.
And I don't know how much, you know, spoiler alert, no one's ever been charged with this.
Yeah.
So I wonder, you know, either like historian, I mean, it's a cold case, I suppose. You probably wouldn't solve it, but I wonder how much science has gone back and been like, oh, that's this person, that's that person. Not sure at the time if they knew who exactly these pieces belong to, but August, so we're in 1938 now, 3 scrap collectors found a torso of a woman wrapped in a man's blue blazer and covered in a quilt. Her body and legs were found in a box and wrapped in butcher paper. Her head was also wrapped the same way. Some of her body parts appeared to have been refrigerated at one point. So of course, I mean, if you're killing that many people, where are you going to put them? Although, that supports the butcher theory.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think it's a butcher more than a doctor.
Well, a second body was found nearby. Both bodies had been placed in plain view of Elliot Ness's office window.
Wow.
Yeah. And he was, like, he had been, you know, so, not worshipped, but people knew him for taking down Al Capone.
Yes.
So, like, he had, like, a reputation to uphold. And this really messed with him. He was so mad that he conducted raids throughout Kingsbury Run. He and 35 officers and detectives tore through homeless encampments, rounding up suspects. Shacks were raided for clues and burned to the ground when they were finished. They had arrested 63 men, but none of them were found to be the murderer. So there's a little bit more to that. I think at this time, you still needed a warrant to kind of do raids, conduct raids.
We're going to do a raid.
You don't do alcohol. So I think he had tried to at one point use the fire department to be like, we just want to check to see, if this is up to code. And then once you're in there, you start either looking around or you question people and whatnot. And also, these people are poor. So if you do burn people, like not burn necessarily their shack, but something near them, I mean, it's going to catch fire. You're going to start. So yeah, I mean, I think, and also they had a lot of power back then. What are you going to do?
Oh, yeah. Well, right. Like you said, it's Elliot Ness. Yeah. You're going to be like, somebody do something. I mean, also, were those encampments allowed? Like, were they, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Probably not.
Probably seen as a nuisance.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the thing, too. I mean, you think he thought, like, if I get rid of this part, there's not going to be no bodies being, dismembered and discarded. July 1939. Police arrested a man of 52. He was a bricklayer named Frank Dolezal. They found him to be connected to 3 of the victims. That was Florence Polillo, because she had lived with him for a time. He was also acquainted with Rose Wallace and Edward Andersey. But I wonder how big was this? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Like,
sounds like a neighborhood.
Right. His confession was mixed with ramblings and precise details, almost like he had been coached on what to say. Before his trial, Frank was found hanged in his cell. He had several broken ribs, which he obtained while in custody of the sheriff the day before. So, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, prisoners probably weren't treated great back then, but also I don't know if he actually hanged himself or not. Elliot Ness had another suspect by the name of Edward Sweeney. He was a doctor who was also an alcoholic and a paranoid schizophrenic. Yeah. So Elliot Ness and his team quietly detained Sweeney, and their investigation took several days to complete, and they used like polygraph testing, but it's kind of secretive. Like, I don't know what else they did to this man. I don't think it came out of, like, people knew that they had a suspect, but for a while, like, a name wasn't released. Mm-hmm. A homeless man had tipped off the police with the story that he was offered food and shoes by Edward Sweeney, and after eating the food he was given, the man started to feel lightheaded. He was able to run away before collapsing. So, drugging people, maybe. With not enough evidence, Ness and his team had to let Sweeney go. After this, Edward Sweeney committed himself to a sanatorium, and the murders had ceased. No one was ever officially charged with the murders of Kingsbury Run. But I kind of feel like that's a little bit suspect. Like, But then again, you don't know if there's someone who, maybe there's like a copycat. Maybe it was more than one person. You don't know.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I don't think it was somebody who lived in the
area.
I don't think it was somebody who was poor.
No.
I would imagine it was somebody who hated them or didn't want them, felt that they were...
That's a good point, actually. Yeah, because if you think about it, I mean, especially if it was a doctor, of course he wouldn't be in the shantytown. I mean, he wouldn't be a part of that community, but yeah, I don't know. I lean more towards doctor than butcher.
But I think the butcher could live near it, or his business would be in that area, maybe being affected by the changes to the community or whatever.
Yeah.
The fact that it's not just women, it's not just men. Mm-hmm. And there was one black woman, but also it was the 1930s in Ohio. So I just don't know that.
Picture mostly white people.
Yeah, I don't know what the population would have looked like at that point. So maybe there just wasn't the opportunity for it. But I don't know. It just seems like...
They were adults, the ones that were known about.
Yeah.
And they all seem to be poor. Mm-hmm. or of that community, kind of.
Right.
We'll never know because it's so old now.
Yeah.
But it's like, come on. Especially when you don't have the distractions of, like, TV. Like, you gotta have seen something, right? Like, homeless people are being maybe...
Well, and you know it's being talked about.
Yeah.
You're out and about. You're socializing with people. That's how you find out what's going on.
Right. I don't know. What did you know about this?
I just knew it was a thing.
Like, there was a serial killing.
That nobody was ever
or serial
caught
killer.
for it. I would also imagine, although I don't know that it occurred anywhere else shortly thereafter, but you have to think, like, once they start doing raids, the person might be like,
well, that's why
bye.
I don't know. I feel like that Edward Sweeney, it's weird that he was like, all right, I'm going to go away now, and then they just stopped. But you're right. It was also around the time where they burned everything down, so it's like, well, I guess that was fun. I'm not going to do it anymore.
And as a doctor in the 1930s, you know you're probably not gonna graduate out of the facility at that point as somebody with schizophrenia. Mm-hmm. That's a big sacrifice to be like, well, I guess I should be done. This was scary. Like, I don't know. I don't think a serial murderer puts themselves away and just stops.
You don't think?
I don't think so.
Because
Not
he'd be
with the
safe
kind of
in
brutality, though.
That's true.
The kind of person that liked to do that sort of thing.
Right.
To just go, well, that was enough.
That's true. I don't know. But then again, like I said, maybe it was more than one person. Maybe one of them was a butcher. Maybe one of them was this Edward guy.
A group of people who thought that they were terrible vigilantes.
Yeah. Maybe.
I don't know, man. That's horrible. To just be like, I just feel like you'd be walking down the street and be like, please, I don't want to be the one that,
talk
like...
about, like, anxiety.
Oh, my God. Don't go under bridges.
Right.
Try to avoid bridges. Yeah. Don't let your children go under bridges.
Don't let them play outside. What else are you going to do? It's the 1930s.
I know. Oh, gosh.
Anyway, happy murder. Oh, my God.
That one was easier to take than...
You think?
Yes.
Well, it was longer ago.
But you're also... Yeah. You're...
hopefully they died. A lot of them died by decapitation. So hopefully it was just quick. You know?
Yeah.
At least
and I suppose if they didn't indicate that there were other signs of, like, torture.
Yeah. I mean, like, they had said the women were more dismembered, but a lot of them had died by just decapitation, so it wouldn't have mattered to the victim at that point. You know what I mean?
Right. It's just somebody taking their rage out.
Morbid.
Interesting.
Yes, we still haven't figured out a sign off yet.
No, it's been 2 episodes.
I know. They don't know that.
An hour. Oh, goodness. Well, all right. We're back at it.
We are.
You can expect more from us.
I'm excited.
Yeah, I am too. I think, I don't know, listen, I know TikTok's whatever is happening with TikTok, but the tarot talk is telling me that I should really focus on my creative endeavors.
I think that would be wise.
So,
cool.
We'll see. Let's see what happens. Blow this one up, guys.
Yes. Bye.
Start watching. Or listening. Whatever the fuck you do. Okay, bye. Thanks for listening to Relatively Weird. If you like what you hear, make sure to leave us a review and follow us on your podcast player of choice. You can also find us at Relatively Weird the Pod on Instagram. If you have any stories you'd like us to talk about, send us an email at relatively weirdthepod@gmail.com. See you next week.